First and foremost, it means home, I suppose. I'm a great believer and reader in the sort of Scruton-esque idea of home, thinking of nation state and our culture, thinking of that as home. And of course, because of the British Empire, it was spread globally. That culture and everything about it is very much part of the modern world. We invented modernity effectively here in this country, and we spread it around the globe, and it's been very successful, not just in this country but globally. So I guess that's how I think of it. I don't see it as it's no longer an empire, but I guess it's a way of life, really. The beginnings of liberal democracy are definitely rooted in the Anglosphere. So that's how I see it, and it's really very much part of me.
Hello, welcome back to yet another episode of the Anglosphere with David Moore. This time I'm joined by a wonderful guest, and his name is Bruce Goodwin, and he is the epitome of the Anglosphere. Bruce is married to the lovely Keir, who's American. Bruce actually worked in America, he worked in the markets. He is a huge advocate for the Anglosphere, but he's also a real political animal in the United Kingdom, running New Culture Forum Beaconsfield, which is one of the local NCF branches, campaigning for a free country, strong borders, lower taxes. And of course, the Anglosphere is an important tenet as part of that mission, surely.
Yes, well, thank you, David. It's a rare public outing for me, but yes, I'm very much attached to the Anglosphere. My name is about as Anglo-Saxon as you can get, so it's shared by some more famous people, obviously, but yeah, very much Anglosphere, Anglo-Saxon, whatever. I'm very much part of it.
Now, throughout history, the Anglosphere has been labelled the Anglo-Saxon Empire. We still see it recently when Russia calls us the Anglo-Saxons, who are meddling, as they say, with affairs. But the reality is, the Anglosphere is would you say it is global Britain, whether it be America, Australia? How do you define, what does the Anglosphere mean to you? What does it mean?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, it means home, I suppose. I'm a great believer and reader in the sort of Scruton-esque idea of home, thinking of the nation state and our culture, thinking of that as home. And of course, because of the British Empire, it was spread globally. That culture and everything about it is very much part of the modern world. We invented modernity effectively here in this country, and we spread it around the globe, and it's been very successful, not just in this country but globally. So I guess that's how I think of it. I mean, I don't kind of see it as it's no longer an empire, but I guess it's a way of life, really. The beginnings of liberal democracy are definitely rooted in the Anglosphere. So that's how I see it, and it's really very much part of me.
And it's interesting because one of the former, I believe, was Supreme Court Judge Scalia in America, who you may know. He went to Switzerland and he spoke about his time visiting there. And then on this trip, he thought, I don't think I've ever been to Britain before. I think he's not of British heritage either. And he went to Britain, and the first thing he said was, "It feels like home." And how the Charlie Kirk said famously that when I say make America great again, I mean bring America back to its British roots. And there seems to be a very special bond, especially in America and Britain, that cultural bond, the values.
Well, yes, and quite rightly, because although the American Revolution, as it was called, it wasn't really a revolution. It was people living under British rule that wanted more say in what in the way they ran themselves, but they didn't want to really leave Britain per se, which is why they adopted so much of what they already knew. They adopted our large swathes of our constitution. Of course, they ruptured the relationship with the monarchy, so they ended up with a republic. But so much of what you see in their constitution is similar to ours, but it's written down and very specific to them. But yeah, there's so much that echoes.
And it's interesting because Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations puts the world into many camps, and he labels the Anglosphere as one of them. And it's interesting because the original American Revolution is said to be it was a revolution of Englishmen fighting for their classical liberal rights at the time.
Yes.
And Britain, or the empire at the time, was almost it was a conservative versus liberal argument of political philosophy, and a lot of the British troops in the American Revolution were German mercenaries who grew up in continental Europe, which was incredibly poor and deprived of wealth. And they came over fighting the Americans and realised they were so rich. It's like, why are they fighting against what was quite an affluent Bond?
Yes, and many of them stayed.
Yes.
Yeah, I can remember, because I spent some time in Texas, and I remember going, there's a place there called New Braunfels, which has a huge German community down there. And, I remember doing Oktoberfest in Texas. Never having done one in Munich. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So we have this link with the United States, but it's an odd one. I mean, I think there are clear differences, and there are strengths and weaknesses to both systems. We haven't written down our constitution, which I think at times was quite important and a strength of ours. But now people are talking about, should we write our constitution down? And we have this odd. I'm intrigued. I read more and more about this, and I'm trying to get my head around it. But we are both quite liberal, traditionally very liberal countries. The US took liberalism from its roots here in England, but it's worked out very differently. So we had, I think, very strong institutions. So you had liberal-minded country with strong conservative institutions. And, Disraeli talked about the, accepting in a liberal country that we had to have change, but what sort of change? And our institutions kind of decided and distilled the good ideas from the bad ideas. So that was the basis of our country. But and we didn't have written down a First Amendment, whereas in the US, like us, lots of liberal thinkers, but with this written constitution, which is now, I think, helping them, because what we've suffered is actually, where did a lot of this uber liberal progressive stuff comes from? It actually washed over us from the States, and we found that we don't quite have the protections we need. We now have, our institutions have been weakened, and we have progressives in those institutions marking the homework of liberal policymakers. And I think we're finding it very, very difficult.
And these institutions that, like you mentioned, you go back to the American Revolution, the Constitution is fundamentally quite you could argue as a very Lockean, classical liberal constitution, but nowadays considered to be conservative. And I suppose now, their institutions have survived the best test of time rather better than ours, because one could argue Britain's unwritten constitution can be easily vandalised, like we saw with Tony Blair.
Yes.
Supreme Court, like you say, liberals now doing the homework. Whereas the American Constitution is safeguarded. To amend it requires a huge supermajority.
Yeah.
And you have a Supreme Court that seems to be more of a caretaker of its constitution, rather than here where we have a Supreme Court which is eroding our constitution.
Yeah. And it gets even more complicated than that, because of course we have talked about replicating parts of the US, such as, we now have a Supreme Court. There is I guess there always has been, but there's quite a vibrant republicanism within the country now, which, particularly with what appears to be a weakening royal family after the death of the Queen. So there's this tendency to adopt US ways into our institutions and so on. So why not adopt the whole thing, lock, stock and barrel? But the danger, I think, with that is that we I think also have an eye on the continent. So we're sort of adopting the US setup, but at the same time, seems to me we're doing it in a way that's trying to adopt the continental ways, which are actually quite different from the Anglosphere. If you want to understand Brexit properly, I think it's the fact that we always were, a round peg in a square hole.
Yes, of course.
When it came to the European Union, and
as Charles de Gaulle said.
Yeah, and he was right, I think.
Yes,
although possibly he
has a maybe spied, but
but the common law, which is the fundamental basis of our society, does not fit with the continental ways. So we're being. I just don't think that a lot of thought has gone into this. People, the New Labour, when they messed around with our constitution and tried to bring in some of these American ways, with a view to looking at continental Europe, for instance. I just don't think there was a lot of thought about what was going on there.
They tried to build institutions that were quasi-American, quasi-European.
Yeah.
In effect, to implant their influence when they're out of government. So House of Lords, parliamentary sovereignty is being taken out of Parliament.
Yes, and whether it was deliberate or not, I think that what it's led to is an erosion of democracy, and I think that's what worries me the most. Here we all are with the oldest parliamentary democracy in the world. In fact, the model of parliament that was adopted around the world in different ways, and yet we seem to be the most keen to undermine it and give it away. So it's very difficult. I think there's a lot of talk now about repealing and restoring a great restoration, which for this country, of course, will be the second restoration.
Yes,
because we restored the monarchy and didn't go the way of Europe and the continent.
Do you think, going back to the 17th century and the rest of the Great Restoration, obviously Cromwell, who came in, he essentially was quite anti-continental. He wanted a system where the government served the Lord. It felt that at the time that the Pope's influence in Britain was undemocratic. He wanted to expand the rights of men and women. But Cromwell seemed to be a very much a conservative revolutionary. Although one could argue he was an iconoclast.
I mean,
but Cromwell, one could learn a bit from him about how he went against what he thought was a flawed institutions, and wanted to rebuild them in a very conservative and Christian way. But then he's such a complicated character. It's interesting to compare how, because Americans look at Cromwell quite positively.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is this Puritan sort of vein running through the Anglosphere.
Very Protestant.
Yes, Protestant Puritan.
Right to the individual.
And of course...
individual salvation.
Correct. So I think what the country did back then, which it's generally been quite good at, is kind of realizing that that you know, the best thing to do is to have a bit of a fudge. You know, I look at our democracy and our parliamentary system, first past the post, all of these things, which we continually debate and argue against what's wrong with it. But what's actually right with it is that it's a fudge that works.
Yes.
And, you know, the out and out, like, Puritan view of the world, we pulled back from that. We pulled back from being a republic. So I think that's been the strength of our system. So I'm not sort of, I am hopeful that we will find a way through this, because we are a liberal society which it empowers the individual, but it has always worked in so much as you know, individual freedom has also demanded collective responsibility. And you know, I think that can be restored.
I think the problem is the term liberalism. What does it mean now? In America, liberal definitely means someone left wing. You know, a classical liberal in America would arguably be under the conservative umbrella. Perhaps some conservatives aren't too happy with that. But I mean, I say this, for me, I'm not a liberal. I think a lot of the country's problems come from at least modern liberalism, and this hyper-atomization of the individual away from societal responsibility, family responsibility, building families, building institutions. Because I suppose institutions start at the family. They start, as Edmund Burke argues, and these little platoons of a great conservative nation. Yes,
I mean, I think we are a liberal country. I think you have to accept that.
But how can you define that?
Well, you know, individualism. You know, the ideas of property rights and.
Because that's arguably a conservative tenet as well.
Well, yeah, but it actually came from liberal thinking. So we go back to the Disraeli thing that you know, if you live in a liberal country, change is inevitable. So I would say we have to accept we're liberal in the sense that we have changed over the centuries. Now, change for change's sake is to me bad, but change in a considered way, where you know, the world changes. Power blocks change, technology changes, and so on. I think so. You move with the times, but you do it in a considered way, and that for me is a sort of good sort of liberalism.
Because you have neoliberalism, right? Which obviously, you know, we saw some quite famous neoliberal politicians of the 20th century, arguably neoconservative. But this notion of neoliberalism built international institutions, it built NGOs, it made this notion of Fukuyama's end of history, which is just the global markets dominate. There's probably no need for the Anglosphere to unite because we're united with the world. And now we see Secretary of State Rubio march Germany with the Riot Act, reading it to Europe and saying, one, be proud of your heritage. Two, the end of history is a nonsense. This is a multipolar world, and that we need to, essentially, America is not going to subsidise the continental Europe. It has to pay for its own defence. But it will still have its support, providing it does that, and not rely on America as is dishing out the dough on defence. And I suppose a lot of people in the Trump administration, and Rubio, could argue that this age of liberalism is dead, and actually part of their new conservative agenda is to bring back the Anglosphere as a power bloc. Obviously, there are issues with America and Canada, or Trump said in the past, although my humble view, I don't think it will ever come to fruition. And I think Canada will remain a free and sovereign great nation. And I wouldn't want it to. I think Trump was very wrong on that. But surely, neoliberalism is dead, and the Anglosphere's pathway is...
I think the problem is liberalism has become a bit of a word salad, and we're struggling to define left and right.
Yeah.
We're struggling. To me, conservatism is about understanding your roots, what's tried and tested, and what is worth keeping. And I think that we've kind of lost our way with that.
Yes.
We no longer know what was good. The whole attack on our history and so on. We've kind of lost completely any idea that what our liberal democracy has done was good. I've thought about this a lot, but I feel like the collapse of the Soviet Union was key because I think the Western world, which was predominantly the Anglosphere, but of course with Europe, with its Christian roots and so on. That we had an adversary, and we I suppose understood what it was we could lose, and we protected it. We'd protected it in the Second World War, and we'd formed NATO, and we kind of knew what we stood for and what we were protecting. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, I feel as though we got a bit arrogant.
We didn't know what to do.
We were arrogant.
Drowned in our own honey.
And again, free markets, which again is another liberal concept. We thought, well, we're just going to spread liberal democracy around the world. We're, free markets. We're going to open up the world, and then globalism took its place. But we started to. For instance, when we allowed China into the WTO, we did that because we thought that they would open up their country to free markets and liberal democracy. And
they thought inevitably it would have a democratic transition.
And looking back now, how naive was that?
They picked and chose. They kept the markets, but didn't change the government.
So they became mercantilist, which has boomeranged back on us very badly.
Because we gave up mercantilist values.
Exactly.
China adopted that. Exploited a gap where they said, come on, offset your manufacturing to us, we'll keep the costs low.
Yeah.
You can be a service-based economy.
Exactly. And then because we had lost our adversary, we started looking inwardly, and the liberal minds started to pick apart our very structure and started to say that we're bad people, we did this, we did that. So I don't think I think we have to accept our liberal roots and thinking, but what we have to restore is this sort of conservative institutional side of things, where you accept change, but you have blocks and measures which allow you to debate and discuss and so on. And when finally something has been debated to death, you say, okay, we'll allow that change.
Yes.
I think again with New Labour, with the changes that were made constitutionally and institutionally, what we've had is whereas normally we talk about culture being upstream of politics, I can't help thinking that it feels the other way around now, that activist groups have been pushing through law to sort of push their liberal agenda, and we're having a culture imposed on us almost.
Yes.
So, society used to police
itself.
Culture. It used to police itself. Obviously we're something of a secular nation now, but the church had its influence on morality, and our Christian history had its influence on morality, but mostly it was a consensus of opinion amongst the people, and the state kept itself out of that.
Yeah.
And what's happened now is we are having culture imposed on us in many ways and forms. So I think that rather than dismiss liberalism, I would just say just restore strong institutions and restore conservatism within the framework of our institutions. That's what I think I would say.
Bruce Goodwin, thank you for coming on the Anglosphere show.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, David.
Thank you.